"We counted 20 animals," the ecologist said. 20! A wildlife researcher at Argentina's National Patagonia Center would later hold that number against what the archipelago became. In the summer of 1946, the Argentine Navy released 20 beavers into Tierra del Fuego. Today, there are 70,000. They have leveled roughly 120 square miles of forest, twice the land mass of Washington, D.C. Two nations have since agreed to spend $33 million to undo what 20 animals started. The animals came from Manitoba, a cold province that knew what beavers could do to a watershed. Tierra del Fuego did not. The logic was clean, the way bad ideas often are. Beaver pelts had made fortunes across Europe and North America. The archipelago at the bottom of the world had rivers, cold air, and no competition. I'm Dr. Raymond Finch. I have spent my career watching ecosystems absorb what we release into them. But nothing prepared me for what a single season in Tierra del Fuego looks like after decades of this. In the summer of 1946, those 20 animals entered Lake Fagnano. No predator waited for them on the far bank. Nothing did. In North America, wolves and mountain lions and wolverines kept beaver colonies in check for millennia. Populations built pressure. Predators released it. That mechanism did not exist here. It still does not. The southern beech forests of Fuego evolved without any large dam-building animal. A North American cottonwood, cut and flooded, will re-sprout from the root. Southern beech will not. The water simply holds, and the tree dies standing. The field teams measuring damage in the archipelago found 31,000 hectares of peat bogs. Forest and grassland altered beyond recovery. That is the floor of the accounting, not the ceiling. Every dam they built raised the water table around it. The meadow behind it drowned. The forest at its edge followed. Each colony expanded outward, and the next generation pushed further still, into valleys that had never heard this animal before. The fur trade never materialized. The market had moved. The animals remained, and they crossed from Tierra del Fuego onto the mainland without a map, without a permit, without a pause. No ceiling by any measure the program had ever used. Territorial, demographic, ecological. There was no ceiling. The same animal that repairs watersheds everywhere else on Earth was erasing one that had stood since the last ice age. And the erasure was permanent. Most people who hear the word beaver picture something healthy. Still water, lodges, willows trailing their tips at the edge of a clear pool. That picture was built in North America, where the trees and the dam builder shaped each other across millions of years. The southern beech forests of Tierra del Fuego, the Lenga, the Ñir, the Guindo, never shared a continent with this kind of pressure. Not once in their entire evolutionary history. They carry no blueprint for surviving what a flooded, felled valley asks of them. A North American aspen stand gets cut and flooded. It re-sprouts from the root. The root system is already adapted to exactly that event. A southern beech stand goes under the same water, and it dies standing. The trunk stays, the roots rot, nothing replaces it. That is not a drought, not a fire, not a temporary stress the tree can outlast. It is structural erasure trace. The footprint now, location by location, and you begin to understand what that biological gap has cost. At Lake Fagnano, the release point itself, the surrounding valley floor is a mosaic of grey skeletal trunks rising from still black water. The dam builders moved through and moved on. Across the Rio Grande drainage on the Argentine side, functioning peat bog within living memory is now open sediment flat. The carbon oxidizing into the air rather than staying locked in the ground. Along the channels feeding the Strait of Magellan, road infrastructure has been undermined repeatedly. The dams raise water tables across entire valley floors, far beyond the dam itself. And across the interior of the archipelago, on ground that early surveys described as unbroken native cover, close to 31,000 hectares of peat bogs, grassland and forest have been altered or destroyed. I'm Dr. Raymond Finch. I have spent my career documenting what happens when an animal meets a landscape that never learned to absorb it. The physics here are not complicated, but what the field data returned from the archipelago's interior was a number that made me reread the methodology. 16 million hectares of native forest are still standing, and under direct threat from a population that has shown no demographic signal of slowing. The same animal that functions as an architect in its native range, rebuilding watersheds, raising water tables, slowing floods, functions as a demolition crew here. The biology is identical, only the evolutionary context has changed, and the Lenga cannot tell the difference. The peat that is now oxidizing at the Rio Grande flats took thousands of years to accumulate. Once it is gone, once it has been exposed to air and broken down, no replanting program, no budget line, no bilateral agreement recovers it on any timescale a human institution can plan for. Gone is the right word, not damaged, not degraded. Gone. What nobody fully anticipated in the decades of expanding survey work was this. The 70,000 animals mapped today represent the population that was findable. The terrain that has not yet been formally surveyed borders the 16 million hectares of standing native forest directly, and it runs in every direction. The terrain beyond the mapped edge is not empty. It is occupied by animals that have never been counted, moving through ground that has never been formally walked. The gap between findable and total is the mechanism. No survey team reaches every island channel in an archipelago this size. The population the agreement is aimed at grew in the places no one was watching. Chile repaired roads that beaver dams had undermined. Not the land, not the standing timber, just the asphalt. They paid $2.1 million in 2002, fixed the same roads, and paid $2.4 million again in 2005. Not a single animal was removed, not a single dam was gone. The fur trade logic held on longer than it should have. Policy conversations kept a door open for a harvest industry that was never going to materialize. No viable market came. The animals did not wait. 3 things made eradication functionally impossible before anyone said it out loud. The scale of the archipelago, the absence of any natural break on the population, and a political window that had already closed. In North America, wolves and mountain lions hold beaver populations inside bounds the land can absorb. Tierra del Fuego had none of them. The accelerator was pressed before the first dam was built, and there was never a break to press back. This is the part that made me stop and reread the field notes. The binational agreement to attempt eradication targets a population that is orders of magnitude larger than what existed in the first 2 decades, when removal would have cost a fraction of what it costs now. The full eradication program has been costed at roughly $33 million. That number buys removal. It does not buy back the peat. It does not rebuild the canopy. It does not return what the carbon held for millennia before it oxidized into open air. The window in which this could have been cheap and fast closed quietly, and no one recorded the exact moment it shut. What remains is a signed agreement, an enormous population, and a landscape that will not look the same in any lifetime now living. The Lenga beech the beaver fells is not eaten. It is raw material. The animal needs the trunk to build, the bark to seal, the branches to anchor. It cuts with purpose. One dam, the water rises. Across the valley floor, the water table lifts with it, slowly, quietly, the way a tide comes in at night. The beech roots sit in soils shaped by glacial drainage over thousands of years. They have no answer for standing water. Within a single growing season, those roots begin to die. The trees stay standing for years, out grey, stripped, skeletal, because nothing pushes them over. They are monuments to a flood the forest never learned to survive. In North America, a flooded riparian zone fills back in. Willows, alders, sedges, plants that evolved alongside beavers over millions of years, move into the wet ground. In Tierra del Fuego, nothing comes. No flood-tolerant flora evolved here to fill that niche. The pond simply expands into open wound. Upstream, the peat bog is next. That bog accumulated carbon across thousands of years of cool, slow compression, layer pressed onto layer, decade onto decade. Submerged, it stops storing. It releases. The gas moves upward through the water column and into the air. The cascade runs in sequence and it does not reverse. The dam raises the table. The table kills the roots. The dead canopy empties of insects. The birds that nested in the living lenga follow the insects out. The pond silts. The beavers move upstream and start again. The eradication feasibility assessments classified certain terrain as unsuitable. Too exposed, too high, too far from the original zone. Survey teams found animals there anyway. The 70,000 figure is the lowest published count. The actual spread reaches terrain still not fully walked. The original release was on an island. The assumption was that water would contain them. Beavers are powerful swimmers. Tierra del Fuego is an archipelago, threaded with channels narrow enough to cross on a calm afternoon. Water was never a barrier. The population moved between islands as though the map had no edges. It reached Chilean Patagonia. Each new valley received what the first valley received: the dam, the flood, the grey standing dead, the silence where the canopy birds were. The physics does not vary, only the ground changes. I'm Dr. Raymond Finch, and what I keep returning to is this. The engineer that repairs watersheds across the northern hemisphere is, in the south, doing the same work, with nothing on the other end capable of receiving it. The same animal, a completely different result. The part that made me stop and reread the field notes was this. The peat bog does not simply die when it is submerged, it switches function. Carbon that accumulated across thousands of compressed, cool seasons begins moving the other direction. Out, not in. The bog stops being a sink and becomes a source. No eradication program reverses that. You can remove every animal on the archipelago tomorrow, and the carbon those bogs released will remain released. That is the debt the land is still owed, and there is no line item in any remediation budget that pays it back. The physical law underneath all of it is plain. Remove a check, and what it was checking will run until something else stops it. In a system that never evolved alongside that check, nothing else will. Nothing else will shift the frame to the River Tay in the Scottish Highlands. Eurasian beavers reintroduced, they produced the first naturally born kits in 400 years, documented in a drainage that had been formally classified as hydrologically degraded. The same animal, a forest that never learned to survive it, against a landscape that spent millennia alongside it. Scottish Natural Heritage resisted expanding that programme for years, citing unlicensed animals as an unacceptable risk to farmland drainage. That position delayed formal legal protection until 2019, one institution, holding the line against an animal that was rebuilding the very wetland systems the region had spent a century losing. The difference between those two outcomes is not the animal. It is never the animal. It is whether the land on the receiving end evolved to survive what that animal does. And Tierra del Fuego did not get that choice in 1946. The land holds what we give it, and it holds it longer than we plan for. That is not optimism. That is the physics. Share this with someone who still believes the damage is permanent, because the evidence, in Scotland at least, says otherwise. Drop your region in the comments and name one species you have personally watched disappear from your area in your lifetime. One bird, one animal, one thing that was there when you were young and is gone now. What did you watch disappear? And yes or no in the comments, have you ever seen something come back that you were certain was gone for good? Because if the answer is yes, I want to hear that story. Next, along the River Tay, those first kits born in 400 years grew into a population that began re-engineering drainage patterns across a catchment written off as beyond repair. Scottish Natural Heritage resisted the programme's legal expansion until 2019, on the grounds that unlicensed animals posed an unacceptable risk to farmland, a delay that cost the catchment years of recovery it cannot get back. The unresolved tension remains. The same engineer destroying an irreplaceable southern forest is, in its native range, returning salmon to rivers that had forgotten them. And the difference between those outcomes is not the animal.